Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to see one of the greatest parades in the Midwest as we bring the antique cars and trucks, the horse units, the tractors, and the steam engines in front of the Cavalcade of Power. It gives me great pleasure to bring back, for his 30th year announcing the Cavalcade of Power at the beginning with the cars and trucks, Mr. Dean Herrick. Dean, why don't you get the cavalcade started?
Thank you, Linus. I have to get a little bit more cord because the longer I do this, the harder them numbers are to read. They're smaller. We'll be ready, Don, just as soon as we get room. I'm going to do a little something different today that we haven't done for a while, and it's simply because I'm able to with the equipment we have. I have an exact replica, hand-produced, of the very first Ford automobile. Mr. Tom Daw from Wayland, Missouri, is going to drive that, and I'm going to have him come up here and tell us a little bit about that. Then I'm going to put a Model T behind it. That's what evolved from this first Ford. Then the second thing I'm going to put behind it's a Model A. So that's the way the Ford started. That's really the way the automobile industry started. However, Tom's was the very first one. There was many of them that came out behind that we lost over a period of years. I know in the 50s we lost several automobiles, the Studebaker, the Hudson, and is some that I remember, the DeSoto, Edsel. But we've still been able to manage to make it. But this is what came out of Henry Ford's garage back in 1896. And then he built the Model T, which is behind it, and he built that until 1927. Then in 28, he came out with the Model A. And the reason you see so many Fords around is Henry was a genius not only in building the automobile, but he also knew how to do mass production. He was one of the first ones to make an assembly line. Tom Daw out of Wayland, Missouri, is going to tell you a little bit about how this thing come about.
June the 4th, 1896, Henry Ford grabbed an axe and chopped the door frame out of a building out in back of his house and drove his little car out through that hole. This is a replica of that car. The original car is in the museum in Detroit. It's encased in a glass cage. I found some data on it, and this is built almost to scale of his, the engine and everything. Gasoline-powered, 2-cylinder.
You definitely won't see many of those. Walt Kincaid out of Wayland, Missouri, one of our longtime members, a past club president, and he's driving the Model T. This happens to be a 1924. You kind of keep an eye on these as they change a little bit from the early teens to the late 20s. This one here is Mr. and Mrs. Harold Jacobs, and they have a 28 Ford two-door. They're right here in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Dr. Carlton from Morning Sun, Iowa, he has a 1921 Model T doctor's coupe. You're not making house calls? You would if you could. If you're looking for your doctor from up there around Morning Sun area, he's down here playing. Major Watkins and his daughter, and Major's in his 1926 Touring. Mr. Watkins has been to every Old Thrashers parade, every one from the very existence of Old Thrashers. He had one of the first cars that was here. He hasn't missed a one. Here's a past president from down in Wayland, Missouri, Mike Clifford, and he's got him a Model T depot hack. What year? This one happens to be a 21. James Bogner, he's from down in Missouri, and he has this 22 Ford Speedster, and he hasn't missed a show for a good many years too. How many? 49 years for him. Said he's only about 3 when he came, first time. Major Watkins' daughter from down around St. Louis area, she's driving a 1930 Model A Ford from Yarmouth, Iowa, and we have our club secretary riding. James Fordyce out of Iowa City area, he's driving a Model T pickup that he donated to Old Thrashers. This is the Gertis family out of Burlington, Danville, Iowa. Bob Gertis's, and they have Sweet 16 Julie Mallums from Mount Union, Iowa. Mr. Gertis has the feature car this year, which is that Stanley steamer over there. Here comes from Mount Pleasant, Iowa here. It's the Carvers, and it's a 1941 Buick Special. 40. Told you I can't see good. 1977, Carl Calvert and his dad, they owned this automobile, and it was our feature car, and it happens to be a 1914 Carter car. Probably the only one here, isn't it, Carl? Larry Madison out of Kissimmee, Florida. He's been with us quite a little bit. Did originate around the Quad City areas, and he's driving his Plymouth. This happens to be a 1940. He was working down there in Disneyland a little bit. Goofy caught him with Minnie. That's where Goofy learned everything, was from Larry. Here's our very first feature car in 1975. James Fortune and his wife from Morning Sun, Iowa, and they have a 1926 Ford two-door. Now we do have a center door coming through. Henry Ford did play around with some different door styles. Here's a beautiful restored Model A. This one happens to be a 1930. And this one comes right out of Mount Pleasant. Wayne and Marion Tepstra family, right here in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. I've got some automobiles out of Arkansas, Oklahoma, Florida. You name it, we've got them here this year. This one here's out of Bonaparte, Iowa, 1930. This is Gary Kinney from Bonaparte, Iowa. Art Ham right here out of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. He's got him a 1925 Model T, 22 horsepower. These things sold for around $400 to $500. This one here's a little different. This happens to be a 1919 Overland, 90 horsepower, Model 90, and it's a Bob Gertis family out of Burlington, Iowa. Mr. and Mrs. Art Good from over in Illinois had this one in 1983 as a feature car. This one's a 1909 Ford Touring. This is a big car here. This is the Packard. You don't see many Packards, but that's one of them we lost back in the 50s. This is a 1948. This is Bob Gertis and his wife from Danville, Iowa. It's a 48 Packard. Here's one I'm glad to see come through every year. One of our longtime club members had passed away, had this, but we still have it. It was the Illinois State Fair state champion race car, and it was built in 1938, and it's a Model T. Model T race car.
Too much?
Pat Stewart won that back in Illinois. No, wait, let's see. This one is a 1926 Model T.
Oh. That one is already.
Here's one all the way from Graysville, Pennsylvania. Jesse Livinggood, and he brings this back. Been coming back several years now. This happens to be a 1912. I think last year or so we upped the years to 52, and here's a 52 Chevrolet right from Geneseo, Illinois. Mike Burrell, Chevrolet Deluxe, 1952. Look at this one here, 1934 Ford, Paul and Ferna Gardner from Cedar Rapids. And I got Fawn Boston Kimple, Miss Sweet 16 here in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. This Auburn Speedster was a feature car. Let's see, when was it? Back in 1980. This happens to be a 1935 Auburn Speedster. A relatively expensive automobile. Still yet today, but it'll run down the freeway. Mr. and Mrs. Bill Brickey and the grandchild right here from Mount Pleasant, and there's 39 Ford. It's got the oval front in original condition. Here comes an automobile all the way from Fort Myers, Florida. This is a 1931 Model A truck from Fort Myers, Florida. Just got through telling you they didn't make any. Who let the dogs out? I didn't even see you coming. You old pup, you got a nice young girl with you, ain't you? Are you dating? Hey, I know him. I got a few things to say. Don't go anywhere with him. I'd get out. Floyd said he was 10 years old, 81 years ago. He's 91, and he comes out of the Quad Cities. One or two of these cars go through. And I don't know, probably stole that car. Here's one out of Mount Union, Iowa. It's a 1939. Bob and Jonas Stott from Mount Union, Iowa. It's a Buick. He's going the wrong direction. Old Slick Willie got caught the other day speeding and talked him way out of it. I don't know how he did it, but here's a, this one here's an Overland. It's a 1912 Tom Sater. It's 1912 Overland right-hand drive. Ellie Parrish out of Wapello, Iowa has this Calliope on a Cadillac. And I think they're going to play it here in just a second. (1907). (1907 Cadillac). This one here's a 27 from Dale Preeb out of Cahokia, Missouri. Mr. and Mrs. Dale Preeb. This one here, Danny and Phil Gravers out of Mount Pleasant. It's a 1929. Here we go. Phil Gravers driving his. Where'd you get all these young girls, Phil? When I knew you, there wasn't that many around. 1951, Studebaker. Yesterday we had somewhere between 65 and 70 cars parading, and we've got more than that today. This one's out of the Quad City area. It's a 1923 Model T. This one is the Johnson family. Here's a 1928 Durant. This comes from the Kroll family right here in Mount Pleasant. Let's call it D55 6-cylinder. She's 58 horsepower, and that one sold for $795 new. There was a lot of money back then, too. It's a lot today. Dean Parrish from Wapello, Iowa, and his 29 Buick. Sandra Herrick from Springdale, Arkansas is driving this service truck, has her granddaughter out of Oskaloosa. Kind of gets a chance to get the family together here. They've been coming back quite a while. And this is Arledge Transfers, one of their old service trucks. She said she'd drive it because she ain't worried about a flat tire. Here's one 1925 Forrest O'Kee from Moray, Missouri, 25T. Now look at this nice little outfit. Might not be a Model A or a Model T, but other people could build automobiles. This one happens to be an International. She's a 1911 Auto Wagon. It's owned by Gerald Bristol, and he's all the way from Rock Falls, Illinois. Isn't that nice? This one here's the Dodge Brothers. This is a David Shellady family. It's a 1917 Dodge Touring. Bob Buffington had this as a feature truck back in 1995. He's from Washington, Iowa, and it's a 22 Ford Double T truck. There's a guy that built that stuttered, and then he said, it's a T. So they used it, 2 T's. Charles Zingerfoos and his wife from Hayesville, Iowa, had this as a feature car in 1984. It happens to be a 1918 Ford Runabout. This one here is from Fairfield, Harold Rebling, 1929 Model A. What was the price on that? $385. That was a cheap one, wasn't it? And a Sweet 16. He's our club vice president this year. That was a cheap one for $385. Warren Schultz and his wife in 1990, we picked this car. It's a 1932 Ford. What'd you say? You like that, don't you? 1932 Chevrolet Sport Roadster, right-hand drive. It was built in Argentina. Peterson family had this one in 1987. Now this is a 1910 Sears. There's no Roebuck to this. This is straight Sears. And then a 1913 Buick from Donaldson, Iowa, the Kenny Seib family. Now that Sears sounds like it's hitting on one cylinder. It is. That's all it's got. Here comes a nice 1936 Ford Owen White from Ainsworth, Iowa. Tell me you don't have the top down. You should have, but it's a little hot, huh? Here comes a 1910 Hutmobile that was a feature car in 1997. Bill Hudson from Walcott, Iowa. 1910 Hupmobile. We got to get the name on this one. This one's from Coralville, Iowa. It's 1930 Model A two-door from the Brown family, all the way from Coralville. My brother Gilbert Herrick and his granddaughter, he's from Springdale, Arkansas, driving Don Simmons's 1928 Chevrolet Roadster. We featured this in 1981. And a few years back, it was on the national calendar for Chevrolet. Picture was taken over by the depot. It's kind of a rare find in itself. Don's restored a lot of those. Rod Lincoln from New London, Iowa, driving his Chevrolet. It's a 1936. It's original condition.
I went to bed. Well, back at 10:30. Like my last bed.
I know. That's what Tammy.
What's that? Is that Ford pushing that Chevy? Hey, David Shelley's 1927 Chevrolet. Yeah, L.J. Roth. And, I won't tell who it is then, Richard. I won't say it's Richard Martin and his brother Denny. Push him a little faster, Richard. Take that slack out. Here's a nice Model A. This is 1930. This is Fred Hickenbottom from Fairfield, Iowa. Dick Sabosky out of Brighton, Iowa. He generally is able to get him a Sweet 16 every year. Leaves his wife and gets a Sweet 16, don't you? 1930 from Brighton, Iowa. Let me see here. Bonnie Hall, she's from Burlington, Iowa. Brian, good job. Sonny and her little buddy in a 1925 Chevrolet C-Cab truck. Sonny Scott from Oskaloosa. Larry Brenheiser, 1929 Chevrolet Roadster. She's a nice one, Larry. Here comes a fifth generation Model A truck from the Reynolds family, right here in Mount Pleasant, and number 5 generations driving it. That's 5.5 there, ain't it? That's the 5.5 generation there. Here comes an Airflow out of Newton, Iowa. Isn't that a pretty one? They're a lot quieter running too, aren't they? This is a 36 DeSoto Airflow. Gordon and June Anderson from Newton, and Alvin's in the back. Hang in there, Alvin. There's an old electric truck. This one's out of Springville, Iowa. Jim Johnson in a 28. John's Electric. Says call him, he'll find your shorts. That's an old one too, isn't it? Here's a nice Chevrolet pickup right out of Henry County here. Got Henry County plates. I think it's the first time I've seen it through. Krull family. It's a 1950 half-ton. Remember the old curved back glass? Here's a nice one here too. This is a Super Deluxe Ford. Ellis and Evelyn DeGrange, yes. Should remember that pretty soon. Here's a nice little Ford here. This one's from Cedar Rapids. This is Jared and Carol Hills from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and they have a 49 Ford Custom. It's a flathead 8. Here's one out of Oklahoma, first year through Ford. Pretty nice outfit. 1952 Kenworth. She's got over 2 million miles on it. It's a bull nose, 220 horsepower. And he's out of Marlow, Oklahoma. He's going to shoot you that the Jake brake one time. That Jake brake was designed so when the exhaust come out, instead of firing it, it held it back, and then consequently, instead of wearing out the brakes, the motor would hold it kind of going down the hill. It sure did help a lot. But that's a beautiful old truck. Here is a 1918 from Salem, Iowa. This is Lloyd Banks, Model T. The Heisey family, they've had this one in here a good many years. I don't know how long, but it's a 1921 Model T truck. How many years you been in here? Quite a few. About 25 years they've been running that. Here's a nice one out of Missouri, international dump truck. This is a 1936, and it's John and Ann Lamke, and they're from Union, Missouri. Nice truck, John. This one's one of mine. This is 1930 Studebaker duplex Phaeton, four-door hardtop, driven by my son today from Burlington and his father-in-law, Fat Stewart. And I got my old buddy in the back, Bobby Williams. He's one of your entertainers over here at the tent. He'll be showing, entertaining us from about 9 to whenever tonight in the tent, right in front of the old car barn. 15 years he's been doing this. 1923 Ford T Speedster, Dave and Carol Miner. Isn't this yours, son? Dad's shaking your head no. Oh, Mom's driving she's driving the electric back here. This is 1916 Raw and Lang electric. That one runs quiet, as long as the batteries don't go flat. Here's my dad and 4 of his grandkids. Got a grandson and some great ones. And he's from Delta, Iowa, in a 37 Chevrolet, and he's 90 years old and enjoying every day. 1931 from the Rue family out of Iowa City, Iowa, Model A Ford. That's a 40 horse. The Daly family, they've got some Model A's here. I'm just going to call them all John. This is 1917, John Daly family out of Burlington, Iowa. This one was a feature car in 2000. This is a 1920 Model T, and this is a center door. So they're all a little bit different. Beautiful white walls on there, John. Now this one's a 1931 four-door, and this one would be out of the John Daly family. Where's Pappy at today? Way behind. Here's a Veely truck. This one was a feature truck in 2001. It's a 1913 Veely, Francis and Ida Daw of Ollie, Iowa. Veely was made up in the Quad Cities. They made an airplane and some other things. Here's the old Whiskey 6 Nash, 1923, Brad Keesley and his wife from Iowa City, Iowa. That was a moonshine runner. She's got some equipment in underneath the back seat where you could hide a bottle or two. It still does today. Might be some in it too. 1930 Dodge, Ken Young and his wife from Fort Madison, Iowa. This must be the last truck. I don't see anything else. This one here is from the Eldon Wise family up at Wayland, Iowa.
My name is Dave Frieden. I represent the horse area here. We're going to get off in a rush here. Starting off our parade, we have Claire Pacia pulling our area director, Don Carlson. We really appreciate having him work for us. Been here a number of years, and he's been real good to all of us here, and that's why we all keep coming back. This oxen Claire's driving is Jerry. He belongs to Jacqueline Smith from Brighton. She's driving Jim and Joe here. Jacqueline's been with us a number of years with the oxen. She's quite a hand with them. Next up, we have Ed and Jessica Miner. This is Jessica's horse. Her name is Bess. This old girl is 25 years old. She's been here ever since I've come, and I've been here about 18 years now. And this is one of her trademark deals she's done for years, the floppy cart. This little gal really thinks a lot of this horse, and she's a real good horse for a little girl like her to have. Ed maintains the equipment on the grounds here in the cooking places and the refrigeration and things like that, but he also works on the heating and cooling systems in Muscatine, Iowa school districts. Next up, we have Howard Smith's team. Doug Smith's up there, his son riding along, and I think this fellow's name's Russell driving. He's a mule, man. They've spoiled him pretty bad. Maybe one of these days he'll wise up, but he's got an awful nice team of mules that ought to be here on that wagon. Anyway, these fellows do a lot of work here helping us with our demonstrations. Around here, the whole thing is a volunteer operation. We all put in a lot of time here, and we enjoy making a good show for you people to watch. Here is Cliff Henderson from Cedar Rapids area. He's driving a pair of painted horses on a 3-seated Surrey. Cliff's a retired postal worker. He's been retired a long time, and he's quite enjoyed his horses and coming down and helping us with this show. Next up here we have the Bob and Alice Whitlatch family. They got some of their, I believe 3 of their daughters with them, and they're driving a pair of roan Belgian mares that they come out of Canada that they raised up, and they're pulling a farm wagon here. Bob's a retired policeman for the Cedar County, and Alice is a homemaker for Cedar County. I believe, I'm not sure what all the girls do, but I believe one of them's a nurse or something, and the other one, I think she's still, she's looking for a husband, maybe, I heard, but maybe we could find her one. Bob says, please. Next up, we have Chuck and Janet Suter, and this is Chuck's brother riding along here. They're driving a 2-seated spring wagon and driving it with a quarter horse here. These folks, Chuck's a mechanic, and Janet works for the, I believe, the license department in the state of Iowa. They're really involved in their horses. She was a member of the Haynes family, well, still is, till she married Chuck. Kind of spoiled her, but she's a dancer over here at the barn dance every night. Next up, we have Kenny and Mary Baker team, and I believe they're assisted by some grandsons, and they're driving a Shire team of horses in the South Bend wagon that this family owns. Kenny is a machinist up in the Quad Cities, and I believe Milan. Mary is I think a maternity nurse. These folks are been coming down quite a few years and really help us out a lot also. Next up is Blackjack, driven by Kent Hartman and assisted by Charlene Whipple. And they're driving a single-seat top buggy here. These folks been coming around here a couple of years now and like to put on a pretty show with their little buggy horse here. I raise Percheron horses personally. I'm from Eliza, Illinois. I don't get to do a whole lot of fooling around here because they found out I can spread the bee a little bit here, so now I'm more of a talker than a worker, huh? Here we have Kenny and Judy Penton. These folks are from Moberly, Missouri. They both work for Orslin Industries. Kenny's been there as a truck driver, and Judy's been in insurance administration there. These folks, they raise Belgian horses here. I believe this is a mother-daughter. The mother's been here 3 years, mother-son, I'm sorry. Mother's been here 3 years, son 2 years, and they've had a real good showing with them. They work real well for us. I'm not excited about some of the obstacles we encounter here. Next, we have the TJ and Terry Bell family. These folks got a bunch of young kids and raised some Belgian horses up there, do some farming and work at fertilizer company and a big hog house. And they're a real versatile family. We're glad they're down here helping us, and they're driving a pair of Belgians, Jake and Jade. Next, we have Keith Whitlatch. This is Bob's brother. These boys at law enforcement must run in their blood because Keith is the retired Cedar County sheriff up there. He just has him a team of Belgian geldings, and he spends a lot of time driving and helping out. And he's also in one of the wheels involved with the Cedar County Show Festival up there. That'll be happening later on this fall. And following them, we have a pair of Belgian horses from Pickering, Missouri, driven by excuse me, this is the Whipple family. Bob Whipple driving, Kevin Whipple standing behind. I believe his mother Dagmar's up on the seat there. This wagon here was built by the late Marion Howell years ago, and he donated it to the association. We have quite a few pieces of equipment out here that Marion spent a lot of time digging up, refurbishing, and getting out here for us to use. Next up, we have John Undernear from Wayland, Iowa. He's driving a pair of Percheron horses here, and I believe he's got all of his grandkids here helping him out. He's pulling a Senton freight wagon from the association's collection here. This would have been something like a city delivery wagon. They threw a few things on me today. I usually do not use cards, but I had to get some names here straight so I didn't get shot when I got back to the barn. Here we have Gary Seth. He's assisted by his 3 sons, Quentin, Colby, and Corey. These boys are from Farmington, Iowa. I think Gary is a welder fabricator in a shop here in town, I believe. They're driving a pair of quarter-horse Percheron horses here that these folks broke, and they've got a manure spreader here that they rebuilt. Only guarantee they gave on this, you didn't want to stand behind it. Next up, we've got the Thomas brothers here. Jack is a construction worker. He runs a dozer. He pulls some horses on the side, and they're pulling a slip scraper. He's assisted by his brother Roscoe. Now, as long as I can remember, this has been kind of like a family vacation for these 2 guys. They're always together down here. Glad to have them with us. Now we have the Davison family here. These guys have been here for a lot of years helping out here. They take a particular interest in baling off the thrashing machine there. This is some home-raised horses here, and I think since the beginning of time they've pulled this road grader through this parade. Richard is a son driving. He's assisted by one of his sons, and Dad Bob's on the wheels. Next up we have Dan Wistrom. He's driving a pair of Percheron geldings here that he recently acquired to be a Mount Pleasant team. He's pulling the Troy Consolidated School Bus. This thing has been around here a long time. She's had some accidents and been reworked, but we keep, through voluntary labor, we keep on keeping it out here so you folks can see what it once was. He's assisted by Buddy Kais. Buddy's been in there helping us with providing some equipment from time to time and a whole lot of advice for us to keep this thing going. Next up, we have Don Garrett from Dowds, Iowa. He's driving a pair of Belgian horses. He's pulling what's called a hay tedder. After you mowed the hay, you want to turn the hay up and fluff it a little so it dry better. You run this through the field and then just gently finger it up and fluff the hay. Don uses this. I believe he's been using it at the State Fair Antique Farm Equipment class with a team. Don's been quite a versatile man. You want to see somebody plow with a lot of horses, just come down and watch the plowing this afternoon. Don will probably be down there driving. Next up, we have the Terry McElhaney family. He's assisted by Enos Yoder from Bloomfield, Iowa. Enos is a horse trainer down there and a Percheron breeder. Terry's a truck driver, and he raises some Percheron horses also. They're pulling a loose hay wagon here and a hay loader. This is what you would have loaded up behind that hay tedder after the hay got good and dry. Next up, we have Bert Giltner family. This is Bert and his daughter, Tara. I think Tara's driving. Tara's an x-ray technician. Bert's a farmer down there. He raises Black Angus cattle and farms quite a little land there, and he uses this team quite a bit in his cattle operation, hauling hay and choring and the like. Bert's a real hand on a walking plow. He's a real hand and versatile everywhere we go with him. We love to have him here. Next up, we have the Brants. They're from Marengo, Iowa. These folks have a trucking business up there, Iowa River Trucking. And I guess, come to find out here, I figured that Mr. Brant was the horseman, but here was Mrs. Brant was the horsewoman, and she's teaching him how now. Kind of a role reversal there, huh? Next up, we have the Wistrom girls. They're driving some registered Morgan horses their family owns and raised. This is Jamie driving, Jody assisting, and I must be their boyfriends riding along here. Kind of got them in the backseat position, huh? These girls grew up down here from the time they were real little girls. I remember first seeing them. I'm not certain that they weren't maybe in diapers yet. They've come a long ways, though. Next up here we have David White. He's assisted by his wife and daughter and grandchildren. David's a horse puller. I guess he's a truck driver nowadays. He's had so many career changes since I've known him, it's hard to keep up with him. But anyway, this team of horses will be pulling Monday. He's pulling the horse pull wagon to advertise the pull. This fellow comes down here early and helps us set up and all, and he's been a real hand to have around. We're glad to have him. I guess to finish our parade here, we got Neil DeVasier's team. These horses come from my stock. He's pulling my wagon, and this is my brother-in-law, so you see how this goes, you know. He's assisted by Jenny Davis in driving there. Well, I guess we better tell it like it is. Every time Neil drives, he and I get together, he crashes me somehow, so we don't trust him for the parade, so we got somebody else to drive. Neil's assisted by his grandson, Chucky. Hey, I want to thank all of you people for watching our parade, bearing with me for making my mistakes and all. We're glad to have you all here, and we hope you come again.
Well, this is the first model. It's a 1959 half-scale double-cylinder Rumley, owned by the Sater family of Mount Pleasant, operated by Jeff Wichman and Brian Spencer. This one coming up is a half-scale 65 horsepower case built in 1982 by the Crothers family of Lenox, Iowa, operated by Larry Weaver, built by Gerald and Dean Crothers. This engine coming is a 1985 1/3 scale model of a 65 horsepower case owned by Lester Clemens of LeClaire, Iowa, operated by Larry Flack. And what he is yanking along there is a freelance model separator built in 1962. It's built by the late Ralph Shelburne, given to Old Thrashers in the memory of Ralph and his wife, Edith, by their family. They're out of Zionsville, Indiana, and the rider is just a bunch of old Indiana Hoosiers. Here's a 3rd scale advanced Rumley owned by William Rentford of Beecher City, Illinois, operated by the same. Okay, this larger one, this is a homemade engine by Dale McLean, owned by Mike Roush, Fairfield, Iowa, operated by Mike. And on this side, this baby one here is a 3-inch scale, 65 horse case by the Crothers family of Lenox, Iowa, operated by Dan, also Riker and Roland Crothers also riding on there. These are all hand-built jobs. These aren't go to the store and buy. And the one passing on the outside is a 1982 half-scale Advance owned by Wayne Kennedy of Danville, Iowa, operated by Brian Kennedy. This took them 4 years to build this. This one's a half-scale 65 horse case built in 1988, owned by Al and Melinda Hunsink of Carlisle, Iowa, operated by Andy Chockney and Melinda. This one here is a freelance road locomotive 4-horse It's built in 1979 by William Thiel, Burlington, Iowa, operated by Dan Thiel and Lawrence Thiel. This one is a half-scale 65 case built in 1978. Darrell Bohr of Toddville, Iowa, operator Dale Bohr, and it was restored by him also. This engine's a 1983 half-scale advanced Rumley, owned by Lester Butterfield of Toddville, Iowa, operated by Kevin Butterfield, big brother. This is a freelance again. They call it the Jitney. It's a 1979 model, owned by Jay Whitford of Plymouth, Illinois, operated by Jay. Your water clear today? Or is it pink?
Had blue on the day before yesterday. Yesterday was pink.
This is a half-scale 50-horse case, owned by Jim and Diane Arment, Eddyville, Iowa, operated by Jake and Dana. This is a 1993 half-scale 65 case, owned by Gail Dixon of Greenville, Illinois, operated by Gail Dixon, and built by Gail Dixon, the engine by Tom Turney. This girl sitting there whispering in my ear, she says the model of the tape for all this cavalcade today is available, and you'd like to order one, Museum A next to the stationary steam engines down at the far end. So if you're interested in purchasing a tape, you can run right down there and get one. This is a half-scale Baker replica built in 1966, owned by Bob Smith of Clinton, Iowa, operated by Tim Marsh of Monticello, Iowa. This next model is a 1989 half-scale 20-horse Russell, owned by Tom Turnbull of Rushville, Missouri, operated by Natalie Lesberg, Miss 2000 volunteer. This little one here is just a scale model of a Rumley. It's a third scale of a 60-horse Rumley from Stewart, Nebraska. Next one is a freelance, a young machine shop. They call it the Jim Dandy. Is built in 1992, owned by Jim Coyle, East Peoria, Illinois, operated by Jim Coyle. Andy Ellis is the fireman.
I think that takes care of the scale models. Now we start into the feature tractor line, which is a Rumley oil pull. You notice up there in front, that box in the front is filled with used oil. That's what cools the engine. That's why they call it an oil pull tractor. It's made in LaPorte, Indiana. This here is your feature tractor. It's a Model K 1220. It's a 1919, owned and operated by Steve Tolander of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Steve bought this from the Fricky brothers up here at Mount Union, Iowa, the late Charlie and Alden Fricky. This thing has an awful time trying to stay in its place at night. It seems to me like it likes to go down to the steam area, play in the sand down there. What's wrong, Steve?
I think this may be a new feature at Midwest Old Thrashers. We're going to have a moving display of the feature tractor. This next Drumley oil pull is a model 1630H, built in 1921, owned by the Peters family from Centralia, Missouri. Cheryl and Natasha Peters are the operators.
And the steam engine is a 1886 12-horse case, owned by the Sater family in Mount Pleasant, operated by Brian Warson and Larry Harvey.
This next Rumley oil pull on the far side is the 1630. It's the 1919's year, owned by Frank Jarvis of Fairfield, Iowa, and Jerry Bonnet is the operator.
This next oil pull was built in 1922. It's owned by Larry Holmes, Dan and Ken Buckert. Larry Holmes is from down at Cahokia, Missouri. Dan and Ken Buckert are from over at Hamilton, Illinois. It looks like Nancy Holmes is the operator today.
This one on this side is a 1913 20-horse return flue Avery, owned by the Sater family in Mount Pleasant, operated by Jeff Ruth and Ernie Gately.
This next Rumley oil pull coming up here belongs to the Midwest Old Thrashers at Mount Pleasant, Iowa. It's a 1919, 1630. Alvin Metternick's the operating. He's the grandnephew of the old Sam. Been in the Bolton family for ever since it was bought new.
The next oil pull was built in 1918. It's a model 3060E, owned by Jerry Shahan from Brasher, Missouri. Joyce Stanton is the operator.
Steam engine over here is built in 1890. It's a 9-horse A.W. Stevens, owned by Midwest Old Thrashers, operated by Janet and Jeff Chapman. She must have filled this out. Her name's first.
This next Drumley oil pull is a model 1525, built in 1925. It's owned by Fred and Larry Buckert from Hamilton, Illinois. Danny Buckert is the operator today. Danny, are you going to be around for the big doings here tomorrow night? I've got something there that you're going to really enjoy watching. It'll be a little surprise.
This one is a 1660 nickel Shepherd, owned by Frank Jarvis of Fairfield, Iowa, operated by Jesse Jarvis.
Next Rumley oil pull is the 1525. The 1926 is the year, owned by Paul and Dorothy Martin of Marion, Iowa, and Paul's the operator, restored by Leo Brubaker and Paul Martin.
Next one's a 1905 16-horse compound Russell, owned by Jeff Ballard, Lily York, operated by Jeff Ballard and Larry Nelson.
The oil pole right over here in front of the grandstands is a model W2030, built in 1929, owned by Jim and Marcia Wilson from Ainsworth, Iowa. Jim is the operator.
Next oil pole is the 2545, the model. It's a 1926, owned by Rick Miller from Delmar, Iowa, and Rick is the operator.
This engine is a 1920 1660 double simple nickel Shepherd, owned by Bill and Darlene Harkemeyer of Walker, Iowa, operated by Bill and Darlene.
This next oil pole is a model 3060, built in 1926, owned by Marvin and Stokel from Tama, Iowa. Mark Sweetie is the driver today. They've got a wagon on there and some riders on behind. Do you have enough horsepower in that Rumley to pull that wagon? I bet you do.
Engine over here is a 1908 30 horsepower Colleen, owned by Larry Nelson of Muscatine, Iowa, operated by Tim Nelson in Gator.
This Rumley oil pole was built in 1928. It's owned by Bernard Carroll Jr. from Brighton, Iowa. Roger Anderson is the operator.
Next Rumley oil pole is the 2540 model. It's a 1927, owned by the Weber family of Deep River, Iowa, and Dwayne Weber is the operator.
Next one's an 18-horse Avery undermount, built in 1912, owned by the Biddle family of St. Charles, Illinois. Operator Don Biddle, assisted by Donnie Bartlett. This is restored by Henry Oswald.
This next Rumley oil pole is a model Y3050, built in 1925, owned by Tom Borrell from Des Moines, Iowa. Bob Swanberg is the operator.
Next Rumley oil pole, painted up real nice here. It's a Model Z. It's a 1929, owned by Wendell Peterson of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and operated by Danny Peterson, Jim Terrence, and Wendell Peterson. Danny Peterson said they did a lot of work on that thing this year.
Next one is an advanced Rumley 20 horsepower, built in 1920. This is owned by the Beer family of Palmyra, Missouri, operated by John and Brad Beer, restored by John and Brad.
This next Rumley tractor is a Rumley Model 6, built in 1932. It's owned by Roger Steele from Anita, Iowa. Roger is the operator.
This next little model of Rumley is an engine is a 3-horse McCormick Daring. It's a 1930, owned by Bruce Lilly of Lilgy of Rosewood Drive. Well, it's got address, no town. Bruce is the operator.
This engine is a Harrison Jumbo 20 horse, built in 1914, owned by Leroy McClure, Colchester, Illinois, operated by Darrell Jacoby and Carl Knudsen.
This next scale Rumley oil pole is a 1/2 scale model 1530. It's owned by Wayne Kennedy from Danville, Iowa. Wade Smith is the operator. Wayne built this little scale model and really truly did a nice job with it. A lot of craftsmanship involved there.
This is a 30-horse Huber, built in 1910, owned by Leroy McClure, Colchester, Illinois, operated by Ron Craigs, and Dave Price is the assistant.
So the little Rumley oil pulls 3rd scale of a 1530 here in front, pulling a separator. It's owned by Wade Smith of Grand Mounds, Iowa, and Paul Lichtenstein is the operator. It's pulling a third scale thrash machine of a case. Weston Smith is the owner of Grand Mounds, Iowa.
This next little scale model is a 1/2 scale Waterloo Boy. It was built by Alan Smith from Grand Mound, Iowa. He's also still the owner of it. Marcus Slaymaker is the operator. They're pulling a 1/2 scale John Deere wagon that was built by Lowell Smith from Grand Mound, Iowa.
This engine's a 25-horse kitten built in 1937, owned by Michelle McClure of Colchester, Illinois, operated by Michelle, and Charlie Lane is the assistant today.
It's a way to smile, Michelle.
That's it.
There you go.
Are you going to bale any straw tonight, Michelle? Not tonight? Okay.
This Alice Chalmer WC here in front is a 1936, owned by John Streets of Deer Creek, Illinois, and John is the operator.
This next tractor is a 1936 Farmall F20 owned by Dwight Copeland from Fairfield, Iowa. Dwight's the operator, and he's being pushed by a 1913 Wallace owned by Midwest Old Thrashers. Jason Copeland is the operator.
This engine is a Bertzel 18-horse built in 1901, owned by Marshall McClure of Colchester, operated by Terry Anderson.
This next Minneapolis scale model is a model of a 3570 built in 1986. The owner is Dell and Candy Copeland of Fairfield, Iowa, and Dell is the operator.
This next tractor is a McCormick Deering model 2236 built in 1929, owned by Marvin Lee and Carolyn Black from Richland, Iowa. Marvin Black is the operator.
This engine coming up is a 1911 Gar Scott. It's a model 1632, owned by Nelson Smith of Janesville, Wisconsin, operated by Darrell Meeks of Waynesville, Ohio.
This next Farmall F20 is a 1939, owned by the Old Thrashers of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Leroy Roush is the operator.
This next tractor is a 1937 Farmall F12 owned by Mark Savid from Toledo, Iowa, excuse me. Oh, excuse me, owned by Lauren Weston from Ontario, Canada. No, the operator's Lauren Weston from Ontario, Canada.
This engine is a 1965 Port Huron, owned by Nelson Smith, Janesville, Wisconsin, operated by Bob Gilchrist of Marion, Iowa. That's wonderful.
This next International 1530 on the far side belongs to the Midwest Old Thrashers, Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Keith Grimm does a lot of work around here, is doing the operating, assisted by his good-looking daughter.
This next tractor is a 2/3 scale John Deere Model D 1940, owned by Rich Kotke from Sharon, Wisconsin. Rich is the operator. Rich also built this little scale tractor.
This engine is an 1890 center crank case return flue, owned by Midwest Old Thrashers, operated by Jim Van Winkle, restored by Wayne Kennedy and a number of other people with interest. This was a volunteer project.
Next, Alice Chalmer WC here in front of the 1937, owned by the Midwest Old Thrashers, Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Dakota Bugs is operating, assisted by Dave Dingman on the fender there.
This next tractor is a 1945 John Deere Model M, owned by Roy and Shirley Houston from Dixon, Iowa. Roy is the operator. How you doing today, Roy?
This is a JI case 930, built in 1909, owned by Joe Gilbreth of Sterling, Illinois, operated and restored by the same. Smile, Joe.
Next model diggy here in France in 1946, owned by Gerald Van Sant, Tracy, Iowa, and Gerald's the operator.
This next tractor is a 1945 McCormick Deering model WDR9, owned by Steve Van Sant from Knoxville, Iowa. Steve Van Sant and Sarah Van Sant are the operators.
This rather large tractor here is a 1910 110 horsepower Case. This was the largest manufactured engine that Case built. It is owned by the Midwest Old Threshers. It is operated by James Foreman of Batavia, Iowa, and Joel Prenicky of Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
This next Farmo F12 is the 1935, owned by David Van Sant of Harvey, Iowa, and David Van Sant is the operator. It's got a 2-row cultivator on it. If you hear a lot of these tractors, you say F12 or F14 or F20 or F30. The last numbers mean that's what the horsepower was when they came out.
This is a 1914 80-horse Case owned by James Foreman of Batavia, Iowa, operated by Robert Foreman, Clark Knudsen.
This tractor in front of the grandstand is a 1936 John Deere Model B, owned by Ron Van Sant from Oskaloosa, Iowa.
This is a 1923 75 horsepower Case owned by Midwest Old Threshers, operated by Eric Douglas of Mount Pleasant, assisted by Jack Siddle of Knoxville, Illinois. This was restored originally by Stan Matthews, who was connected with the railroad before his death.
This next general here in front is the 1940 owned by Norbert Witt of Palmyra, Missouri, and Norman's the owner, or the operator. Member of the North River Old Iron Club.
And right behind him is a 1949 Massey Harris Model 22, owned by Norbert Witt from Palmyra, Missouri. It says the operator's Carey, but boy, that don't look like nobody. If your name's Carey, is your brother named Sue? How do you do?
This is a 1910 75 horsepower Case owned by Nick Foster, operated by Nick Foster.
This next Farmo M is the 1951, owned by Meredith Witt of Palmyra, Missouri, and Meredith is the operator.
This next tractor is a 1936 John Deere Model A, owned by Darrell Steinberger from Newton, Iowa. Darrell is the operator, also restored the tractor and did a really nice job.
This is a 1915 65 horsepower Case owned by Al and Melinda Hunsinga of Carlisle, Iowa, operated by Ryan Limpston and Gretchen Limpston, assisted by.
Next, Alice Chalmers, WC's the 1935, owned by Claude Rum of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Canton Bryce Rum is the operator.
And there's Claude coming up behind him on a 1936 Alice Chalmers WC. Claude's driving this tractor today, and he's from Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and it's always good to see him at the show. How you doing today, Claude? All right.
This engine is a 1919 60 horsepower Case owned by Brian Hodgson of Dubuque, Iowa, and operated by Brian Hodgson and G-Lo White.
This next John Deere GP right here in front is the 1931, owned by Dale Kemp. It says Oldendorf Road, but it don't have a town. Dale's the operator.
This next tractor is a Model 3060 Altman Taylor, built in 1922. It's owned by Midwest Old Threshers. The operators today are John and Axel Magnuson from Clarksville, Tennessee.
This is a 1912 45 horsepower case owned by Mark Henley of Iowa City, operated by Matt and Kevin Henley.
This next horsepower is the largest horsepower built, the 3060 model. It's a 1913, owned and operated by Gary Spitznagel of Wapello, Iowa.
And this next engine is a 1912 60 horsepower case owned by Leon Morrow of Mount Pleasant, operated by Leon Morrow and the new Mrs. Morrow of about 2 hours, Joan Morrow. They just got married in the North Church this morning.
Leon, what's them cans doing following you?
This next tractor is a Avery Model 4080, built in 1913, owned by Marv and Ann Stokel from Tama. I can't see. Is Marv, are you in there? There you are. Couldn't see you for the corner of the cab.
This engine, a 40 horsepower case, built in 1916, owned by Roland Van Vark of Pella, Iowa, operated by Roland, and restored by the Van Vark brothers.
This next Avery is a 2550 model. It's a 1926, owned by Marvin and Ann Stokel of Tama, Iowa. It ain't Marv, they haven't got the names of the ones that's operating.
This one is a 1917 50 horsepower case owned by the Van Vark brothers Pella, operated by Stan Van Vark, and they all got together again to do this one. They restored it.
This next tractor is an International Titan, 25 horsepower, single cylinder, built in 1912, owned by Jerry Shahan from Brasher, Missouri. Jim Peters is the operator. I guarantee if that's got one cylinder in it, which it does, it is a big one.
This one is a 1917 case, 50 horsepower, owned by Mike Parker, Libertyville, Iowa, operated by John Peterson and Dr. Jewel Thomas.
This next McCormick Daring I-12 on the far side is the 1935, owned by Kevin Drummond of Pulaski, Iowa, and Kevin Drummond is the operator.
This one's a 1918 22 horse Wood Brothers, owned by Tom Nichols, Eldon, Iowa, along with the Sweet 16 contestant Megan Nichols. Operating is Tom up there with.
This tractor over here in front of the grandstand is a McCormick Deering Model 1020, built in 1930, owned by Ralph Drummond from Ottumwa, Iowa. Kevin Drummond is the operator.
This next McCormick Daring W30 is a 1935, owned and operated by Francis Elkery from Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
This one's an 1893 16-horse Minnesota Giant, owned by Mike Parker, Libertyville, operated by Mike Parker, David, Chris Jolett, and the seat on the front is in case they scared the horses. They were afraid the animals, so they hooked horses to the front.
This next tractor is a 1947 Avery General, owned by Darrell Brotherson from West Branch, Iowa. Anthony Brotherson is the operator.
Little B Farmall in front, the 1947, owned by Darrell Brotherson from West Branch, Iowa, and Darrell's the operator.
This is a case, needless to say. 40 horsepower case. Okay, Miss Hoffmaster in control, who just arrived this morning after about an 18-hour drive.
The tractor pulling the little wagon right in front of the grandstands was a Model 1020 Titan, built in 1920, owned by Joyce Harney Voss from Mount Pleasant. Lisa Ockenfels is the operator.
This is a 1912 18-horse Avery, owned by Jay Sigafus of Iowa City, operated by Dan Parker and Beverly Atterbury. We'll give Jay some credit too.
This 2545 cross motor case here in front is a 1928, owned by Dale Taylor from Bloomfield, Iowa, and Dale's the operator. He also can make ice cream too.
This is a 1917 16 double simple Reeves, owned by the J.P. Gallahue family of Piper City, Illinois, operated by Bones Denham and John Gallahue III. Bones has been coming here for about 51 years. That's the one in the pith helmet.
Now take a look at this nice Huber Model 3245, built in 1930, owned by John and Kim Hill from New London, Iowa. John Hill is the operator.
This next Twin City is the 2744. It's 1930, owned by Old Thrashers in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Larry Kissing is the operator.
This one here is a 1912 32-horse cross-compound Reeves, owned by Old Thrashers, operated by Matt and Ken. I guess they want to become anonymous. Restored by Amos Richmond, Oklahoma City.
This next tractor is a model 1220 Twin City, built in 1919, owned by Mike Swanberg from Pearl, Iowa. Mike Swanberg is the operator.
This is an 1885 6-horse nickel Shepherd, owned by Jeff Davis. This is a grandson of Charlie Fricke of Mount Pleasant, operated by Tony Beal and Craig Dobbins. Restored by Craig Dobbins.
This next Alice Chalmers Model G there in the front. Got a mower on the sides, a 1948, owned by the Cruel family of Fort Madison, Iowa, or Mount Pleasant, Iowa, I guess. Dale Meswinkle is the operator. They moved here from California the first year at Old Thrashers.
The next tractor here is a 1935 John Deere Model B, owned by the Cruel family from Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Mackenzie Cruel is the operator.
This is an 1889 6-horse Russell, owned by Steve Penrod of Farley, Iowa, operated by Steve and Cole.
Don't have a card on this D John Deere, number 75. Appreciate it if you turn them in so we can give you the recognition going through. This next John Deere D is the 1931, owned by the Cruel family of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. The student driver there in the middle is Madison Cruel. The Cruel family restored it.
This next tractor is a John Deere Model D, built in 1931, owned by Niall Buffington from Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Danny Sammons and Blair Buffington are the operators.
This steam engine is an 1887 Gar Stuttgart, owned by John Wall of Pine Bluff, Arkansas, operated by John Wall Jr. and William Rutta. This is where little John got his start. He's trading off.
This next John Deere L is a 1938, owned by Jenny Miller of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Blair Buffington is the operator.
This next tractor is a John Deere GPWT, built in 1930, owned by Heather Buffington from Dodge City, Kansas. Jennifer Millard is the operator.
And this is a 1919 2175 Baker, owned by Scott Wiley of Marion, Iowa, operated by Scott Wiley, assisted by Denman Connor of Mount Pleasant, restored by Scott.
This next John Deere A is a 1936, owned by Lewis and Doris Tuller of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, ridden by Roxanne Dietz, Princess of the Flaming Row.
This next tractor is a 1928 John Deere Model D, owned by Fred Bride from Roseville, Illinois. Hey, Fred, is that this year's crop hanging on the side? It's Old Thrashers? There you go.
It's not what we've been shelling over there.
This is a 1911 16-horse double Rumley, owned by Chris Pasha of Davenport, Iowa, operated by Chris and the Pasha family.
This next John Deere B is a 1937, owned by Alan Haas of Roanoke, Illinois, and Alan is the operator. Glad to see you over from eastern Illinois.
This next tractor is a 1949 Haas Model D, owned by Robert and Doris Haas from Roanoke, Illinois. Robert Haas is the operator. Tractor's in original condition.
This is a 1919 Case road roller, owned by the Coonrod family of Cedar Rapids. Well, I guess they sent somebody else. It says operated by Dumb and Dumber. They write it, we read it.
It's Alice Chalmer WC's the 1935, owned by the Jesse family of Centralia, Missouri. And says Larry's the driver, but I think Larry's on the fender. He's just telling her where to go. Or maybe she's telling him where to go.
This next tractor is a 1935 John Deere Model B, owned by Herbert and Esther Miller from Burlington, Iowa. Herbert's the operator today.
This is a road locomotive. It's a Nicholas Shepard boiler on a Mack chassis. It's got a Reeves engine underneath it. It's owned by the Coonrod family. This was built by Warren Coonrod of Toddville, who passed away a number of years ago. Operated by Lester Butterfield and Dave Ower of Toddville, Iowa. And also behind it is a Tangley Callipy, made in 1929. That's the way Warren used to say it, so it was restored in Muscatine, Iowa.
Don't have a card on the B there that's going out.
Well, we do have a card on the 1935 Farmall F30, owned by Kevin Wilson from Ryan, Iowa. Kevin Wilson's the operator.
This is a 16-horse Advance, owned by T.H. and S.A. DeWeese of Cedar Rapids, operated by Ken Millsap and Dave DeWeese, restored by T.H. and S.A.
This next B, Alice Chalmer here in front, is the 1939. It's owned by Richard Wade of Ryan, Iowa, and Wade Filderman is the operator.
This next tractor is a 1929 Case Model CC. It is owned and operated by Curtis Sage from Waterloo, Iowa.
This is a 20-horse Reeves engine with a Russell boiler, owned by Earl and Dana Weiss of Severna Park, Maryland.
This next Alice Chalmer B is the 1940, owned by Ed Segerman, Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Ed's the operator. Purchased as is. Is that your grandson or your boy? Your boy?
(1918) 40-horsepower Case, owned by the Coonrod family of Cedar Rapids, operated by John Johnston of Springville. He's assisted by Ken Richardson of Springville and Tim Reynolds of Mount Pleasant.
Right in front of the grandstands, we have a 1947 Farmall B, owned by Marjorie Patterson from Richmond, Virginia, operated by Jeff Sadler.
Okay, this next John Deere B is the 1936, owned by Marjorie Patterson of Richmond, Virginia, Jeff Sadler from Mechanicsville, Virginia, Bob Sadler from Taylor, South Carolina.
This is a 1922 Advanced Rumbly, owned by the Coonrod family of Cedar Rapids, operated by Andy Hansen and Josh Denland. This was originally bought by Mr. DeWeese, who is, or not DeWeese, but anyway, this was a new engine when it arrived here. It had very little time on it.
This tractor is a 1937 John Deere Model A, owned by Larry Derbyshire from Yarmouth, Iowa. He is being pushed by a 1943 John Deere Model LA. Larry also owns this one, and his granddaughter Abby Derbyshire is pushing him down through the track.
This is a 1920 New Huber, owned by the Coonrod family of Cedar Rapids, operated by Alan Doran, restored by the Coonrod family.
The 6 John Deere A is a 1937, owned by Carl Lund of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Jamie Brandt, and Ethan Dirks is the operator.
This next tractor in front of the grandstands is a 1927 McCormick Deering Model 1020, owned by Charles Calderwood from Brooklyn, Iowa. Charles is the operator, and he also restored the tractor.
This is a 1912 2070 Nichols Shepherd, owned by Marion Nicholson of Woodburn, Iowa, operated by Deborah Curry and Choo Choo James.
This next McCormick Deering F30 here in front is a 1934, owned by Charles Clatterwood of Brooklyn, Iowa, and Eric is the operator.
This next tractor is a 1944 John Deere Model B, owned by Steve Hubble from Muscatine, Iowa. Jennifer Hubble is the operator.
Next, Alice Chalmer WC is a 1938, owned by Dolores Wilson of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, operated by Brent Wilson and Riggs Bob Wilson.
This is a 1916 Case, owned by Marion Nicholson and Ryan Wood of Woodburn, Iowa, operated by Cecil Langford of Brunswick, Missouri.
This is a 1952 John Deere Model AR, owned by Joe and Corey Lonsbury from New London, Iowa. Joe is the operator.
This next John Deere B is a 1936, owned by Larry and Marlene Reed of New London, Iowa. Marlene, is you Marlene? Okay, Marlene, you're the operator.
This is a 1923 1648 Russell, owned by Jay Marion and Danielle Bussett of Woodburn, Iowa, operated by Darrell and Betsy Russell.
This next tractor is a 1937 John Deere Model A, owned by Larry and Marlene Reed from New London, Iowa. Larry's the operator.
This next John Deere B coming up is the 1939, owned by Larry and Marlene Reed of New London, Iowa, and Cramson Cully is the operator.
This next tractor is a
See you tomorrow. Appreciate it. That takes care of the Cavalcade of Power for the steam. Now we're going into 2 rows of gas tractors, so we'll see you tomorrow.
This next Alice Chalmers was built in 1936. It's a model WC, owned by the Helpfree family from Winfield, Iowa. Karen Helpfree Garrett is the operator.
Next John Deere B on the far side is a 1935, owned by Wendell and Kurt Helpfree from Winfield, Iowa, and Kathy Garrett is the operator.
This next tractor on the infield side is a 1936 John Deere Model A, owned by Wendell and Kurt Helpfree from Winfield, Iowa. Clinton Garrett and Kurt Helpfree are the operators. It's good to see the young folks getting out here and driving the tractors, getting involved and getting interested in this.
This next Alice Chalmer G on the far side is 1948, owned by Lon Royer and Colton Hensel, the grandson, Morning Sun, Iowa, and Nick Wilkinson is the operator.
Now we have a 1938 Alice Chalmers Model B, owned by Lon Royer from Morning Sun. Also owned by Riley Heinzel, his grandson. Operator is Colton Heinzel and Kathy Helpfree.
Next Farmo regular is the 1931, owned by Lon Royer and Riley Colton Hensel from Morning Sun, Iowa. The operator is Lon Royer and Riley Hensel.
Now, this is a 1951 Farmall Model H, owned by Mary Lou Paul from Brighton, Iowa. Jed Seward is the operator.
Next John Deere B is the 1936, owned by Courtney Bates of Washington, Iowa, and Courtney Bates is the operator.
This is a 1936 Farmall F-20 owned by Kenneth Paul from Brighton, Iowa. Operators Kelly Sockup and Kathy.
This next little scale homemade Gibson is a 1949 owned by Mark Lilly from Little Chute, Wisconsin. Mark Lilly and Jennifer Lilly is the operators.
This next tractor is a 1934 Alice Chalmers Model WC, owned and operated by Casey Conrad.
Next Model A John Deere is a 1934 owned by Lyle Conrad of Olds, Iowa, and Lyle E. Conrad is the operator.
This next tractor is a 1931 Massey Harris Model 25, owned by Lyle Conrad, Olds, Iowa. Brian Conrad is the operator.
This Graham Bradley 1938 owned by Jeff and Bev DeVries of Coal Valley, Illinois. Joel DeVries is the operator.
Over on our side of the track here on the stage side is a 1938 Graham Bradley row crop, owned by Ed Hadley from Bluegrass, Iowa. Ed's the operator.
Another one of the Graham Bradleys. They always sound nice. They got 6 cylinders. They really run quiet. It's a 1938 Standard owned by Lee Hadley of Bluegrass, Iowa, and Lee is the operator.
Over on the bleacher side of the track is a 1938 Graham Bradley Standard, owned by Ed Hadley from Bluegrass, Iowa. Larry Hadley's the operator.
This next Massey Harris Chandler is 1938, owned by Roberta Hadley from Atalissa, Iowa, and Bertha Hadley is the operator.
This next tractor is a 1947 John Deere Model M, owned by Lee and Georgie Canterbury. Steve Graham is the operator.
This next Ford 8M Ford here on this side is a 1950 owned by Jenny and John Calvert from La Plata, Missouri. John is the operator.
Now this is a 1928 Caterpillar owned by Midwest Old Threshers. It's a military style, operated by Nate Graber.
Alice Chalmers WC on this side is a 1936 owned by Roy Graver of family of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Roy is the operator.
Now this is a 1945 Farmall Model B owned by J. Marvin Myers from Hannibal, Missouri. How you doing today?
Got them shined up looking real nice. Another Farmall C is a 1948 owned by J. Marvin Myers of Hannibal, Missouri. And John Sparks is the operator.
Now this is a 1935 Alice Chalmers Model WC, actually built in 4/19 of 1935, owned by Gary Anderson and Jim Crable from Wayland, Iowa. Matt Ring from Cottage Grove, Wisconsin is the operator, riding Deanne Summermeyer and Michelle Corrigan.
Next John Deere B here in front of the 1937 owned by Paul Reese of Hedrick, Iowa, and Paul's the operator.
We have a 1929 McCormick Deering Model 1020 owned by David Marsh from Monticello, Iowa. Dave is the operator.
Next McCormick Deering F30 here in front of the 1937 owned by Gerald E. J. Ehlers, the senior of Anamosa, Iowa, and Gerald is the operator.
Now this is a 1933 Farmall Model F12 owned and operated by Randy Ehlers from Anamosa, Iowa.
This next Farmo F-14 here is 1938, owned by Jeremy Blunt of Scotch Grove, Iowa, and Jeremy is the operator.
This is a 1937 John Deere Model G owned by John Stimson and Larry Osterkamp from Animos, Iowa. Larry's the operator.
This next John Deere D is a 1947, owned by John Stimson from Animos, Iowa, and John is the operator. A lot of these Ds put out.
This next tractor was built in 1945. It's a John Deere Model D owned by Tony and Andy Gilland from Albia, Iowa. Adam Gilland is the operator.
John Deere A here in front, the 1935, owned by Tammy Gilland of Albia, Iowa, and Tammy is the operator.
This next tractor is a 1938 John Deere Model L owned by Tammy Gilland from Albia, Iowa. Tony Gilland is the operator.
This next John Deere GP is the 1931, owned by Bob Balzer from West Burlington, Iowa, your radiator man up there. Ashley Girther is the operator.
Now this gentleman's obviously misplaced. He's run away from the steam train area and got on a tractor, but we're happy to have him here. This is a 1937 John Deere Model A owned by Tim and Debbie Imhoff from Muscatine. Tim's the operator. Did they give you some time off the train to drive in the cavalcade today?
This next Fordson Model N is the 1927, owned by Joe Imhoff of Muscatine, Iowa, and Joe is the operator.
Over on the grandstand side is a 1936 Farmall F-20 owned by Joe Garrettson from Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Joe is the operator and also the restorer.
McCormick Daring 1020s, the 1929, owned by Ron Magnuson, a gas engine man from Good Hope, Illinois, assisted by his grandson from Clarksville, Tennessee.
Now this next tractor is a 1944 Oliver 99 owned by Frederick Heyer from Lawtons, New York. Fred Heyer is the operator. He also restored it and did a really nice job. Good looking Oliver.
Boy, you got a pretty good load on there, Jimmy. This here is the Farmall F-20, it's a 1932, owned and operated by Jimmy Bride of Media, Illinois. Freddie's granddad sitting on the load there trying to tell him where to go.
Now here's a tractor we don't see a whole lot of anymore. It's a 1917 Waterloo Boy, owned by Bernard Carroll Jr. from Brighton, Iowa, operated by Roger Anderson.
This next one, the KC, is the 1938, owned by Adcock Farms of Carroll County, Kentucky. Lawson Adcock is the operator. The 4 generations of the same family farm, 3 generations riding in the parade. They're pulling a day pulverizer. It's a rock crusher. It's a 1916, owned by the Adcock Farms of Carroll County, Kentucky. 5 generations on the same farm. Demonstrations of 1030 and a 230.
This tractor over here on the infield side is a 1917 International Model 816 owned by Bernard Carroll Jr. from Brighton, Iowa. The operator is Paul Deppert.
This next John Deere D is the 1930, owned by Bernard Carroll Jr. of Brighton, Iowa, and Mike Carroll's the operator.
This is a 1949 Farmall Model MD, the D indicating it is a diesel owned by Bernard Carroll Jr. from Brighton, Iowa. Floyd Wortman is the operator.
Next Farmall H here in front, the 1939, owned by Bernard Carroll Jr. of Brighton, Iowa, and Dennis Holmes is the operator.
This is a 1948 Silver King Model 42. Really streamlined looking tractor for 1942, owned by Dick Lauer from Mount Union, Iowa. Brian Burley is the operator.
This next Silver King R66 here in front, the 1936 year, owned by Dick Lauer, Mount Union, Iowa. Jason Remack is the operator.
This is a 1937 Silver King Model R44, owned by Dick Lauer from Mount Union, Iowa, operated by Rodney Davis.
Next Silver King here, Dick Lauer's got several of them. The 1948, owned by Dick Lauer, Mount Union, Iowa, and Jacob Rickards is the operator.
This is a 1936 Silver King over on the grandstand side of the track. It's a Model R66 owned by Dick Lauer. From Mount Union, Roger Richards is the operator.
The last Silver King is the Model 66, 1935 the year, owned by Dick Lauer, Mount Union, Iowa, and Dick is the operator. You got a lot of nice ones there, Dick.
This next tractor is a 1929 Wallace Model 1220 owned by Vic Lauer from Mount Union, Iowa. Vic is the operator.
This next John Deere A is a 1936 owned by Ron Carver from Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Bob Bosey is the operator.
This is a 1948 BF Avery Model B owned by R.J. Carver from Mount Pleasant. Gary Rosenall is the operator.
This next Oliver 70 here in front, the 1939, owned by Charles Twain of Washington, Iowa, and Lonnie Twain is the operator.
But this is a 1922 Fordson Model F owned by Donald Artman from Monee, Illinois. Has the mounted, belly-mounted sickle mower on it. Is a really nice looking outfit.
And I still know where you live. This next Alice Chalmers G is the 1948, owned by John Mackey of Cicero, Illinois, and Jason Bonnets is the operator.
This is a 1946 Farmall Model A owned by Les and Dorothy Koenig from Mantino, Illinois.
This next Alice Chalmers WC is the 1935, owned by John and Marilyn Mackey from Cicero, Illinois. Craig Mackey is the operator.
This is a 1937 Case Model RC owned by Stanley Mackey from Monticello, Illinois. Stanley's the operator.
This next John Deere D is the 1925, owned by the Stems family. Robert Stems is the operator.
This is a 1926 Alice Chalmers Model 2035 owned by the Symes family from Iowa City. Noel Symes is the operator.
This next Massey Harris Challenger here on this side is a 1937, owned and operated by Howard Dobbins of Durant, Iowa. This was the feature tractor a few years back when we featured Massey Harris.
Now look at this, a 1950 Massey Harris 44 Standard Diesel, owned by Herb Lamack from Wilton, Iowa, and Herb's operating today. How you doing today?
Another one of the nice tractors. Here's the Massey Harris 44 row crops, the 1950, owned by Herb Lamack from Wilton, Iowa, and Twyla is the operator.
Now here's a 1934 Case Model L owned by Tim Pace from Muscatine, Iowa. Zach Pace is the operator. How you guys doing today? All right, you having fun? Good deal.
This next John Deere A is a 1936, owned by Brenda Christensen of North Sioux City, South Dakota, and Taylor is the operator.
This next tractor is a 1938 Oliver 80 row crop owned by Melvin Gipple from Crawfordsville, Iowa. Jim Christensen is the operator.
This next Farmo F14, 1939, owned by Bob Sutton of Ollie, Iowa, and Mitchell Sutton is the operator.
Well, here's another Robert Sutton tractor, a McCormick Daring W30, built in 1936, operated by Bob.
Next little C here on this side with the one bottom plow on it. It's a 1946 Alice Chalmers C, owned by Bob Biggs, I think it is, from Lockridge, Iowa. Bob is the operator.
Now, this is a 1936 John Deere Model B, owned by Dwayne Reading from Bowling Green, Missouri. Dwayne is operating today, and he also restored the tractor, and I might add he did a nice job.
Next Cleveland crawler tractor is the Model H 1919 here in front, owned by Dale and Sharon Casca from Ellsbury, Missouri, and Dale's the operator.
There's an old buddy of mine sold me a plow last year and took it home, and boy did it work good. It's Gus Ward driving his 1947 Farmall B. Gus is from Houghton, Iowa, and he's being assisted today by Jacob Puthoff. How you doing today, Gusto?
This next Farmall H is a 1949, owned by Gus Ward, a good friend from Houghton, Iowa. Paul Patoff and Jennifer Steinman is the operators.
This is a 1929 Hart Power Model 1224H, owned by Eddie Ward from Kansas City. Janelle Ward and Eddie Ward are operating. You want to sell that one today, Ed? You gonna keep it? I would too.
The tractor of the woman. This Dick's Hart Power is an 1836 and 1929, owned by the Midwest Old Thrashers, Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Ron Wright of West Burlington, Iowa is the operator.
This is a 1936 Eagle Model 6B, owned by Dick Grimm from Charlotte, Iowa. Dick's always down here. We use this tractor quite a little bit for different demonstrations and lots of work around the ground. Eric, I'm going to probably butcher this one. Hossett? Is that close?
No.
Not even in the ballpark, am I? I'm sorry.
Okay, this next Fordson, English Fordson here in front, the 1926, owned by Dick Grimm of Charlotte, Iowa, and Marcus Slaymaker is the operator.
This is a 1929 Case Model L, owned by Midwest Old Threshers, operated by Alan Grimm.
This next one's the 1936 Model B John Deere, owned and operated by a good friend Alvy Metternich of Carthage, Illinois. Been doing a lot of work out here and been up here for several years. The one on the far side is the 1936 BO with the Orchard tin on it. It's very rare to get that tin. It's owned by the Bucket Farms of Hamilton, Illinois. Jeremy Bucket, Danny's second boy, is driving, assisted by Debbie Sanders from Beecher, Illinois. She's a school teacher up there right south of Chicago. This one right here in front is a 1919 612 Alice Chalmers, owned by the Bucket Farms of Hamilton, Illinois, and driven by oldest son Kenny Bucket. The red one on the far side is a 1919 Moline Universal, owned by the Bucket Farms of Hamilton, Illinois, driven by your director here in the tractor area, Alan Bucket from Mount Pleasant, Iowa. This one on this side, front wheel drive, also is the 1919 Indiana, owned by the Bucket Farms of Hamilton, Illinois, driven by Danny's wife, Karen Bucket of Warsaw, Illinois. This next one is the 1952 VHS, which is a single row high crop. It's owned by the Bucket Farms of Hamilton, Illinois, and Kyle Bucket, the oldest grandson, is driving it. This next one, you might have never seen this. The twin elevator picker, they only built them 2 years, 1952 and 53, on an EC case. It's owned by the Bucket Farms of Hamilton, Illinois, driven by our second son, Danny Bucket. This next one is the 1952 EV. It's a Pigeon tractor. It's 8 inches narrow in the rear end. It's got the orchard fenders on it. It's driven by Garrett Bucket, Danny Golden's son, Harry Sanders, good friend from Beecher, Illinois, right south of Chicago.
This next tractor right in front of the grandstand is an Oliver 60 row crop. It's operated by Todd Heath from from Seton, Illinois. Todd came down here for the first time in about 15 years. Been helping with the show down here. Also helping over at Hamilton quite a bit with Western Illinois thrashers. Todd's getting into these antique tractors, and I think he's really enjoying them.
This next Huber Model L is 1936, owned by Kenny and the gal sitting right here to the right of us, Joyce Logging from Wilton, Iowa, Ken and Noel Clarissa from Durant is the operator.
This is a 1943 Huber Model HK, owned by Marty Huber from Moline, Illinois, operated by Dan and Molly Hedberg from Ankeny.
Huber Model S, the 1935, owned by Dick and Dorothy Buckwald, to Dixon, Iowa. Dick is the operator. That was your granddaughter on there, Dick? Well, good-looking gal. She sure didn't take after grandma, did she? Must have been Dorothy.
Now, this tractor on the infield side is a 1946 John Deere Model A with a John Deere wagon on an 802 running gear, owned by Ken and Marlene Perkins from Bennett, Iowa. Ken is the operator. Thanks for bringing that down. Good looking out, Ken.
Midwest Old Thrashers in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Keith Mitchell is the operator of Independence, Missouri.
The tractor and wagon going out down there is a 1935 John Deere Model B, owned by Ellen and Melinda Hussing from Carlisle, Iowa.
This next John Deere GP in front and the far side is a 1930, owned by Bryce and Jennifer Mitchell of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and Bryce is the operator.
Now, this tractor is a 1938 John Deere Model B, owned by Jake Thompson from Montezuma, Iowa. Jake is the operator on the side there anyway.
This next John Deere B is the 1938, owned by Ron Peck of Montezuma, Iowa. Ron Peck is the operator.
Now, this is a 1937 Alice Chalmers WC, owned by Marv Evans from Guernsey, Iowa. Marv is the operator.
This next Farmall F12 here is the 1935, owned by Gary Moles from Montezuma, Iowa, and Andy Widmer is the operator.
Now, this is a 1939 Farmall Model F14, owned by Dusty DeVasher from Clinton, Missouri. Catherine Williams' cousin is the operator. Says it's a work in progress.
This next Farmall Cub with a belly mower on it, the 1948, owned by Larry Nance of Kilduff, Iowa. Western Didmer is the operator.
Now, this is a 1937 Oliver Hart Parr. It's a 70 row crop, owned by Roy and Sharon Bowers from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Roy's the operator. It's a nice looking 70.
This next Farmall F12 is the 1936, owned by Willis and J. Lilly of Marion, Iowa, and Willis is the operator.
This is a 1938 John Deere Model B, owned by Jerry and Larry Michael from West Branch, Iowa. Sean Michael, the operator.
Another one of the tractors, the 1936 Model A John Deere, is owned by Jerry and Larry Mitchell from West Branch, Iowa, and Fred Mitchell is the operator. Michael.
This is a 1934 Farmall F30, owned by Bob and Brian Busser from Nichols, Iowa. Brian is the operator.
Another Farmall F20 is the 1939, owned by Dan and Brian and Bob Busser, Nichols, Iowa, and Steve Busser is the operator.
This is a 1932 Farmall Regular, owned by Bob and Brian Busser from Nichols, Iowa. Angie Busser is the operator.
This here is an Alice Chalmer UC, the 1938, owned by Bob and Brian Busser of Nichols, Iowa. Bob Busser is the operator, and it's still in original condition.
Now look at this. It's a nicely restored 1936 Fordson English, owned by Paul and Dorothy Martin from Marion, Iowa. Paul's the operator.
All them case tractors, and then he drives the Fordson. This John Deere Model B is the 1937, owned by Jack Stadler of Burlington, Iowa, and Jack is the operator. Got a nice umbrella to keep cool today.
This is a 1941 John Deere Model B, owned by Jimmy Mitchell. Mitchley? There we go, from Richmond, Missouri. Thanks for coming up from Missouri.
This next Alice Chalmer WC is the 1935, owned by Carl and Levita Yoder from Wellman, Iowa. Carl's the operator.
And over here on our side of the track is a 1935 Alice Chalmers Model WC, owned by Jerry Graber and family from Washington, Iowa. Jerry's the operator. Got that nice looking Alice Chalmers umbrella on there. Boy, that really looks nice.
A lot of these people, they caravan down to the Western Illinois Thrashers. About 40 tractors came down a month ago. This next Alice Chalmers WC is the 1937, owned by Dwight Graver from Washington, Iowa, and Juanita Graver is the operator. Well, I don't think that's Juanita's. Dwight must be doing the operating.
This is a 1945 Farmall Model A, owned by Ken and Verlee Miller from, where are you from? Wayland, Iowa. Ken's the operator.
Next, Ford Ferguson on the far side, the 2Ns, the 1946, owned by Don Bouchard of Wayland, Iowa, and Don is the operator.
This is a 1938 Alice Chalmers Model WF, owned by R.H. Dyers from Wayland. Dave Heaton. Where's Dave at? There he is. I missed you. State Representative. What district are you in, Dave? 91? Vote early and vote often.
This next Alice Chalmers WC is going out there as a 1940, owned by R.H. Deers of Wayland, Iowa. Everett Smithburg of Fairfield, Iowa is the operator.
For this Alice Chalmers, we don't have a card on. Is that a UC? WC? We don't have a card on you. Are you going to parade tomorrow? Be sure to fill out a parade card for us tomorrow so we know who you are.
Yeah, we know this one anyway. This one here is a really rare tractor. It's an Alice Chalmers NFWF. It's a 1945, owned by Bob Deers, the operator from Wayland, Iowa, assisted by Jenny Deers, granddaughter, Bob Deers. Only one made that we know of. Really a rare tractor.
Now, this is a 1938 Alice Chalmers Model B, owned and operated by Mary Deers from Wayland, Iowa.
Next, 1936 John Deere A is owned by C.L. Dunston, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and C.L.'s the operator.
And this is a 1941 John Deere Model LA, owned and operated by Phil Graber from Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
Glad to see these tractors painted up and looking pretty nice. This next McCormick Daring 1020 is the 1926, owned by Joe Kaufman from Wayland, Iowa, and Joe's the operator.
This is a 1950 Alice Chalmers WD, owned by Merlin Bouchard from Wayland, Iowa. Merlin is the operator.
These Wayland boys, they really got a nice club up there. They've got a lot of different tractors in it. I know a lot of Alice Chalmers, but they do have a lot of other ones in the Wayland Club. This here Alice Chalmers WC is the 1935, owned by our good friend Norm Bouchard from Wayland, Iowa. Norm is the operator.
Now this is a 1934 Alice Chalmers WC, owned by Robert Craybill from Uniontown, Ohio. Robert's operating today.
Next Alice Chalmers WC is the 1936, owned by Kevin and Lisa Clark of Wayland, Iowa, and Kevin is the operator. Glad to see you down. They gave us down to Hamilton too.
This next tractor is a 1951 John Deere Model A, owned by George Janicek from Washington, Iowa. Dean Wilson is the operator.
Can't be, 'cause I got Dean on mine too.
He was. Which
This
one is
John-
Dean on? Dean's over there.
This John Deere A here in front is owned by George Janacek from Washington, Iowa. And Dean is driving the one over there on that side.
This is a John Deere Model H owned by George Janasek from Washington, Iowa. Terry Riley from Mount Pleasant's the operator.
His next Farmo ends in 1952, owned by Roman Gervik from Brighton, Iowa, and Rex Goodwin is the operator.
This is a 1946 Farmall Model H owned by Roman Jivak from Brighton, Iowa. Roman's the operator.
This next John Deere Linneman, it's just a John Deere B with crawler tracks on it. They built the tracks, the Linneman built the tracks to put under the John Deere B's. BO, 1941, owned by Danny Graver of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, is the owner and the operator.
It's a 1938 Farmall F20 owned by Larry and Pat Meyer from Wayland, Iowa. Larry's the operator.
This next Alice Chalmer RC on the far side is a 1940, another one from the Wayland Club, owned by Dale Whitman from Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Dale's the operator.
Now, this is a unique tractor, a 1949 Brockway Model 49G, owned by Don and Wanda Bolt from Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Don is the operator, and it says Don and Kevin Roth restored it.
This next Farmall regular is the 1929, owned by J.D. Underhauer from Washington, Iowa, and Matt Albertstein is the operator.
This is a 1937 John Deere Model B owned by John Unterhauer from Wayland, Iowa. Glenn Winkler's the operator.
This next Oliver 60 is the 1942, owned by Andy Thomas of Schweischer, Iowa, and Andy Thomas and Heidi Steele is the operator. Heidi's hanging on to him there at the back. Don't fall off now.
This next tractor is a John Deere Model MT, owned and operated by Dale Crawford from Davis, Illinois. Dale, hold up. I had a guy tell me one day that John Deere MT, that the MT stood for Mighty Tractor. Is that right?
I thought it was a midget tractor. This next Farmo F12 is the 1935, owned by Ransford Butler family of Marion, Iowa. Ron and David Ransford is the operators.
This is a 1936 John Deere Model A, owned by John and Don Butler from Marion, Iowa. Eric Butler is the operator.
Next Farmo F20 is the 1939, owned by John and Don Butler of Marion, Iowa. It says Don's the operator. Don, are you on there? Okay.
This is a 1945 Case Model LA, owned by Karen Martin from Springville, Iowa. Albert Martin is the operator. He's back there somewhere.
This SC
Over
case,
there.
This SC case over here is a mud machine, got dual wheels on it. The 1951 SC case owned by Albert Martin of Springville, Iowa, and Vicki Fetterkamp is the operator.
This is a 1925 Case Model 1832, owned by Floyd Schaefer from Fairfield, Iowa. Floyd is the operator and also restored the tractor.
This next Farmo F12 is the 1936, owned by Larry Wagner from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and Larry's the operator. Cedar Rapids, right up there by Waterloo.
A 1934 John Deere Model B, owned by Mandy Ferrier from Ainsworth, Iowa.
This next McCormick Daring 1020 is the 1928, owned by Hank Edgar of Crawfordsville, Iowa, Joe Dane is the operator.
This is a 1938 Massey Harris 101 Senior, owned by Molly Edgar from Crawfordsville, Iowa. There's Molly there, Bill Edgar, old dad there, he's helping to operate. It was restored by Dad Hank Edgar. Actually, Molly's granddad, Hank Edgar.
Billy does a lot of work around here day and night. This Massey Harris Challenger is 1938. Owned by Mitchell Edgar of Crawfordsville, Iowa, and Mitchell Edgar is the operator, assisted by Hank.
This is a 1944 John Deere Model B, owned by Chris and Linda Johnston from Columbus Junction, Iowa. Dennis Whaley is the operator.
Another one of their tractors, Alice Chalmers C on the far side, is a 1948, owned by Chris and Linda Johnson of Columbus Junction, Iowa, and Chris is the operator.
This is a 1938 Farmall F-14, owned by Chris and Joni Shear from Loudon, Iowa. Chris and son Jonathan. Where's John? Is that Jonathan there? Jonathan's 2 years old today. Happy birthday, Jonathan.
What are you doing with that finger in your mouth? Is that pretty good? Don't feel bad, I got grandkids do the same thing. This Farmall F-12 here in front of the 1936, owned by Stephen Shearer family of Loudon, Iowa, and Stephen and Clarina is the operator. Clarina is not with you.
This is a 1936 John Deere Model A, owned by Ori Myers from over at Little York. Ori's driving today, and he's got his two boys on there riding with him, and I think they're kind of telling him which direction to turn.
This next John Deere B is the 1935, owned by Dana Myers of Little York, Illinois, and Dana Myers is the operator.
This is a 1920 Moline Universal Model D, owned by Chuck and Ann Pelly from Wheatland, Iowa. It says Mark Larson from Stanton, Iowa is the operator.
This one here, I don't know which one's pulling and which one's pushing, but this here is two Hubers. Number one, the front lead one, is Ann Pelly on the Huber 35 restored, and number two is the 1935 Huber unrestored model HK. It's number one's owned by Ann Pelly that's driving, and Chuck is following along behind, just doing what she says. This is the after and before.
This is a 1952 Farmall Super M, owned by Darlene Felger from Fairfield, Iowa. Keith Earnhardt, the operator from Tempe, Arizona.
I'm not going to ask you this year what kind of shorts you got on. This here is a good friend, Ed Felger from Fairfield, Iowa, with his John Deere Model A's, a 1937, owned and operated by Ed Felger of Fairfield, Iowa.
This is a 1936 John Deere Model B, owned by Darlene Felger from Fairfield, Iowa. Jim Hammonds from Kingsley, Iowa is the operator.
This next John Deere is also owned by Ed Felger. It's a 1935 John Deere A, Fairfield, Iowa. Keith Elkery Jr. from Tempe, Arizona is the operator.
This is a 1936 Farmall F-30, owned by the late Joe Greiner from Fairfield, Iowa. Troy Greiner is the operator.
This next Alice Chalmers WC is the 1937, owned by Tanya Greiner from Lockridge, Iowa. Robert Stemps is the operator. I think he's setting, yeah, he is. Hadn't got the other two on.
This is a 1934 Massey Harris Model 1220, owned by Daniel Peterson from Mount Pleasant. Wendell Peterson, the operator.
That old Danny's got a lot of tractors, got them all painted up and looking nice. This is a Wallace 2030. It's a 1928, owned by Danny Peterson of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Danny Peterson's the operator, assisted by his son.
A 1935 Alice Chalmers WC, pulling a 2-bottom plow with a fertilizer attachment, owned by Daniel Peterson, Mount Pleasant, Iowa. This is Jim and Jake Terrence, the operators. Okay.
Next, Alice Chalmers G on the far side, the 1948, owned by Wendell Peterson of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. And Josh Terrence, his great-grandson, is the driver. This tractor is in original condition.
This is a 1936 Case Model CC owned by the Rathson family, Wilton, Iowa, Leon Rathson. Rajan. Excuse me. Couldn't read the writing.
Alice Chalmers WC is a 1935, owned by Walter and Bonnie Hill of Birmingham, Iowa, and Walt is the operator.
This is a 1937 Alice Chalmers Model WC owned by Walt and Bonnie Hill from Birmingham, Iowa. Jeff Ingerson is the operator.
This next nice painted up 101 Super Massey Harris, a 1941, owned by Marvin Mallons of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Ron Wright from West Burlington, Iowa is the operator.
Now this is a 1948 Farmall Model M owned by Bob and Pat Waters from Medora, Illinois. Brian Crofton, operator.
This next Alice Chalmers WC is the 1935, owned by Thomas Stacy from Brighton, Iowa, and Tom is the operator.
This is a 1948 Ford 8N owned by Brian Lane and also operated by Brian. Are you from Mount Pleasant? Where? Mount Union. Put the street address on, you didn't put the town. I'll pencil it in now.
This next John Deere M on the far side is the 1948, owned by Brian Smith, 8 years old, of Fort Madison, Iowa, operated by Blake and Brian Smith.
Don't think we have a card on 360, is that right? No card. Did you do a parade card today? You did? Did you do one yesterday?
I'll go with number 361. If you can find it, we'll get it. This tractor was on the Tractorcade, 200 miles. John Deere Beans, the 1940, owned by Edward Wilhelmy from Atkins, Iowa, and Ed is the operator.
This is a Farmall F-20 owned by Roy and Robert Raines from Birmingham, Iowa. Sherry Raines and Caleb Harris, the operators.
Another one of the range tractors is a Farmall F-14, the 1938, owned by Roy and Sherry Raines of Birmingham, Iowa. Roy Raines is the operator.
This is a 1937 Alice Chalmers UC owned by Andy Johnson, an old buddy of mine from tractor shows way back over in Illinois, from his Darien, Illinois, now used to live over in Lahr. Andy's driving.
This Model L case here in front, the 1930, owned by the Heaton family of Farmington, Iowa. The Heaton family is the operator.
This is a 1936 Farmall F-20 owned by Jody Church from Donaldson, Iowa. Says Jody's the operator.
Next Farmall F-20, like I said, when you hear the word 20, 30, 12, or 14, that means a horsepower. It's an F-20, it's a 1937, owned by Don Northup of New London, Iowa, and Don is the operator.
Now this is a 1927 Farmall regular owned by Dave and Gail Fuller from Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Dave's the operator.
This next Farmall H is a 1943, owned by James Schreck from Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Jim is the operator.
This is a 1950 John Deere Model D owned by Gail and Dave Fuller from Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Don Allman from New London is operating.
This next little VAC case here in front, the 1948, owned by Robert Kessel from Fairfield, Iowa, and Robert is the operator. Got a little belly mower on it.
A 1934 McCormick Deering W30 owned by Rick Cooper from Letts, Iowa. Rick's operating. He's really got her wound up today with that straight pipe.
It's nice painted up Farm OM here in front, the 1948, owned by Kip Sheets of Fairfield, Iowa. Aaron Sheets is the operator, pulling a trailer really loaded up. All the girls wanted to take a ride today.
A 1954 John Deere MT owned by Paul Chinieri from Worcester, Massachusetts. Paul is the operator.
John Deere D coming here, trying to adjust the carburetor at the same time. It's the 1928, owned by Jim and Mary Adams of Fairfield, Iowa. Ellen Sonoik is the operator. Worthington, Worcester, Massachusetts.
Over here on the bleacher side is a 1932 Monarch Model 50 owned by Robert Lefevre from Peach Bottom, Pennsylvania. If you need fenders or hoods for your antique tractor, talk to Robert. He'll be here all weekend.
This next Cat 40 on the far side is the 1934 owned by the Midwest Old Thrashers, Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Dean Van Ness is the operator.
A 1927 Caterpillar 60 owned by the Seams family from Coralville. Jim Seams, operator.
This next Cat D2 is the 1938, owned by Donald Sparks of Maywood, Missouri, and Donald is the operator.
This is a 1930 Caterpillar 60 owned by Midwest Old Threshers, operated by Tom Rowan.
Next, McCormick Deering TD40 is the 1935 of the year, owned by Tom Rowan of Danville, Iowa, and his wife Sarah is the operator.
A 1934 Caterpillar D40 owned by the Johnny Beal family from Clarence, Missouri. Johnny operating.
Don't have a card on this road grader, but I see it was out here yesterday evening doing a nice job of smoothing up this track here so they could put the bleachers down. Be nice if they do that every night. Sure makes the bleachers go a lot faster.
This is a 1947 Farmall Model A owned by Chuck and Lillian Lynch from Springfield, Illinois. Chuck and Lillian are out there both on it. Lillian, are you keeping him straight?
That red paint sure looks nice, don't it? This Farmo H here in front, the 1950, owned by Gene and Stevie Howard from New Boston, Illinois. Mike Newson is the operator.
This is a 1952 Farmall M owned by Dave Friedman Sr., Eliza, Illinois. Peg Cryle is the operator.
Another one of Dave's tractors. Here's a Farmo F12, the 1937, owned by Dave Frieden Sr. of Eliza, Illinois, and Brenda Frieden is the operator.
This is a 1950 Minneapolis Moline Model U owned by James Taylor from Fairfield. James is the operator.
This next little H John Deere here in front, the 1941, owned by Mike Vinderlinder of Des Moines, Iowa, and Mike is the operator.
This is a 1942 Farmall H owned by Philip Newquist, is that right? From Agency, Iowa. Philip's the operator.
This next John Deere A is the 1937, owned by Merle Davison of Fairfield, Iowa. Kenton Klopperstein is the operator.
This is a 1936 John Deere Model B owned by Verl Davison from Fairfield, Iowa. Derek Klopfenstein is the operator.
What are you doing going through twice, Jamie? This here McCormick Daring 1020 is the 1929 home of Freddie Bride of Roseville, Illinois, and his grandson Jamie is the driver.
This is a 1938 Minneapolis Moline model ZTU owned by Leland Worthington from Marietta, Illinois. Give him a big wave, Leland. Wave it. There you go. Everybody wave back at Leland. There you go.
This Farmo F-14 here on this side is the 1939 owned by Chris Hahn from Keota, Iowa, and Chris is the operator.
Now this is a 1930 McCormick Deering Model 1530 owned by Jim and Marcia Wilson from Ainsworth, Iowa. Jim's operating.
Next Farmall Super A here on this side is the 1950 owned by Marcy and Jim Wilson of Ainsworth, Iowa, and Marcy's the driver in this one.
This next tractor is a 1938 Farmall F30 owned by Ron Olson Welding from Rock Island, Illinois. Mike Walsh is the operator.
This Rock Island H5 is the model. It's a 1935 owned by Ron Olson Welding of Rock Island, Illinois, and Ron Olson is the operator.
Now this is a 1934 Farmall F20 owned by Cloyd Parrish from Claremore, Oklahoma. Cloyd is the operator.
Next John Deere A is the 1948 owned by Tony Ross of Hillsboro, Iowa, and Brandon Ross is the operator.
This next tractor is a 1944 John Deere Model B, owned by Don and Cindy Dunn from Libertyville, Iowa. Zachary Grubbs, the operator.
This next Model CC case, the 1937, owned by Harris Van Ezen from Tracy, Iowa, and Scott Van Ezen is the operator.
A 1938 Farmall F12 owned by Bernard Seth from Farmington, Iowa. Corey Seth, the operator.
Another Farmall regular is 1928, owned by Bernard Seth of Farmington, Iowa, and Bernard is the operator.
This is a 1936 Farmall F30 owned by Greg Seth from Farmington, Iowa. Farmington, Iowa. Greg Seth's the operator.
Next Farmall F20 with a two-row cultivator on it. It's a 1936, owned by Bob Lillitz of New London, Iowa, and Bob is the operator.
A 1935 McCormick Deering 012. It's an orchard tractor. The O signifies orchard, owned by Jim Seward from Wellman, Iowa. Jim is the operator.
Now we're going to start into a club that came in here on Wednesday evening from South Oklahoma. It's the Murray County Antique Tractor and Implement Association. They come in here with 7 or 8 trailer loads of tractors. They're going to caravan through here. They're going to caravan back home, I think, tomorrow. We sure appreciate you coming here to Midwest Old Thrashing in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and spending 3-4 days with us. Thanks a lot for you coming. Have a good trip back. This here is a W.C. Alice Chalmers 1935 owned by J.J. McGill from Davis, Oklahoma. Davis is the operator. All right.
This is a 1950 Farmall Cub demonstrator owned by the Goldsbys from Goldsby, Oklahoma. Pat Goldsby, operator.
This next Farmall Super C is a 1951 owned by David Ferguson and Dorothy from Shawnee, Oklahoma, and David is the operator.
This is a 1944 Farmall H owned by Pat Craven from Rosedale, Oklahoma. Pat's the operator. How you doing today?
Next RC case here in front, the 1938, owned by Rita McGill of Sulphur, Oklahoma, and Rita's the operator. Glad to see all these people come in. It's really nice to see a club like that come. I think they said 704 or 5 miles over here, I believe, from southern Oklahoma.
This is a 1942 Case VAI owned by Jim and Mary McGill from Davis, Oklahoma. Jim and Mary are operating today.
It's Oliver Hart car here in front, the Standard 70. It's a 1937, owned by Ken and Phyllis Cravens of, well, it's got Highway 59. Ken is the operator.
This is a 1944 Case VAC owned by Jim and Carol Jackson from Okima, Oklahoma. Jim is the operator.
I'm glad to see somebody else got some case besides me. This here is a VAH. It's a VA case high crop. It's a 1948, owned by Benny McGill from Sulphur, Oklahoma, and Benny is the operator.
This is a 1946 Case VAC owned and operated by Jim Dyer from Ardmore, Oklahoma.
The John Deere D here in front, the 1938, owned by Gary Perry from Tecumseh, Oklahoma, and Gary is the operator.
This is a 1948 Farmall Cub owned by Lyle Kruger, Sr. from Muscatine, Iowa. Lyle is the operator.
Thank you, people from Oklahoma, for coming down. This Dix International Cup is a 1948, owned by Lyle Kruger from Muscatine, Iowa, and Lyle III is the operator.
Now here's a 1948 Ford 8N owned by Larry Cooper from Fairfield, Iowa. The operator is Russ Cooper. It's equipped with a front end loader and a rear blade.
This Dix John Deere B is the 1941, owned by Stephen and Bonnie Vogler from Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Bonnie is the operator. All member of the Vogler Antique Tractor Club and the Western Illinois Thrasher.
This is a 1942 John Deere Model H owned by Bill Burns from Sterling, Illinois. Bill is the operator.
This next John Deere 45 roundback combines, the 1957, owned by the Midwest Old Thrashers of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and a good friend Dave Frieden from Eliza, Illinois is the operator. It's original condition.
Now here's a neighbor from up home, Bill Crawford from Troy, Illinois. He's on a 1937 F20 with a 22B mounted picker. How you doing? When did you get here, Bill? Today? Is everything still all right at home?
I'll take the F20 on the far side. We're looking for the card on this one. It's a 38 F20. It's owned by Bill Crawford Jr. of New Boston, Illinois, and Bill Crawford Sr. Jr. is the operator. It's an original condition, the two-row cultivator on it.
This tractor's a 1951 Farmall MD diesel. Bill McComber is the owner from Cascade, Iowa. Bill's the operator today.
Well, that takes care of your Cavalcade of Power here for the Saturday afternoon, the hump day. This is the third day out of the 5-day show. We thank you for hanging around. There's a lot to see in this show coming up here later on tonight. If you haven't got tickets, I think you can still get some tickets to it. There's a lot to see. They're going to be baling straw about 4:30. They're thrashing at 3:30, I believe. 4 o'clock, they're shelling corn. Veneer mill is going to be running at 4:30. There's a lot to see on the grounds. Go over to the gas engine, the car building, look around and spend a good day or two here at the Western Midwest Old Thrashers at Mount Pleasant, Iowa. This time I'd like to thank the fellows that helped announce here. Fred Carlson from Seaton, Illinois, to my left, or to my right, and Joyce Loggy from Wilton, Iowa, the good-looking one here on the table, myself, Fred Burgert from Hamilton, Illinois, and to the steam fella, we want to say thank you for your patience. Fred, you got anything you want to say?
I'd just like to say it's always a pleasure to work with Joyce Loggy and work with you, Fred Buckert. It's a pleasure to be here at Old Threshers here in Mount Pleasant. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for coming here to Midwest Old Threshers, and I hope you enjoy your day and maybe come back tomorrow and the next day and spend more time with us here at Midwest Old Threshers.